All right, now that we've done our 15 through 11, here is our 10 through 6. So starting off, my number 10 is Okja. I think the film really has a lot of staying power. It was the first big Netflix film for me. I fortunately actually got to see it in a theater, which is something that not a lot of people can say. I saw a pre-screening of it, and it looks really good on a big screen. Unfortunately, it was released to most people on a small screen, and that kind of sucks because the special effects are really good on the small screen, but they look so much better on the big screen. Plus anything involving kaiju, it looks better on a big screen. So yeah, that's my number 10. My number 9 is Logan. I really love this movie, and I have kind of been a fan of Wolverine ever since I was young. Wolverine was kind of the comic that kids would sneak around and show each other because, yeah, it was pretty hardcore.
Tee hee hee, you Western children with your comics. Hee hee hee.
But yeah, I remember when I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade, a friend of mine gave me a rubberized comic of Wolverine, and it had,
what does that mean?
Sorry, it had like a rubber cover.
Why?
I don't know how to what. No, this is actually a thing. Like some had like rubber covers or something. I don't know like the correct terminology.
Why?
It was just a specialized version.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, that was my first exposure to Wolverine. I read a handful of trades that some kids passed on to me, and then my mom threw them away. So, yeah, that was really sad. But, as I grew older, I watched the X-Men films, and I really wanted to see Wolverine how I thought of Wolverine, not how the X-Men movies had made him. And Logan was the first time I got to experience that. Unfortunately, that seems to be the last time I'll get to experience something like that since the Disney-Marvel merger has happened. I don't know. Hopefully, they'll make an X-23 sequel. That would be really cool. James Mangold has shown interest in doing that, and I hope he's able to. There's such an emotional resonance with Logan, and I think it's a really compelling film. All right, my number 8 is a French horror / dark comedy. It's called Raw.
Let's get to it later.
All right, we'll discuss it later. All right, my number 7 is a movie that actually got onto a lot of people's worst list. And I don't care. It even got some Razzie nominations, which fuck them for that later.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, moving on to my number 6. Yeah. My number 6 is I, Tonya. I, Tonya was just such an amazing movie. There was something about it that I was really shocked about because I wasn't really sure what I was going to get when I came in because, it seemed like a dark comedy. It seemed like it was going to, tackle these issues, but I didn't know how the through line was going to be. I'm not a huge sports person, but like every once in a while, if the story is like personal enough, I can get into it. And that's definitely what this movie was. It's less about the sport and more about Tonya Harding as a person. And I think it does a really good job of playing with narrative. At like one part, it's a documentary. There's also breaking of the fourth wall. It's really experimental.
Yeah, there's like all the scenes where they're in interviews with the camera person where it's kind of like The Office style a little bit. But then there is the actual narrative part where they're in the scenes. But then sometimes when they're in the scenes, they'll turn around and they'll talk to the audience.
Yeah, and what I loved about this movie was the fact that, like, it wasn't afraid to go there and be uncomfortable and be hilarious at the same time, which a lot of people, when they saw the movie, they thought, oh, well, this movie is endorsing domestic violence.
No, it is not, but it does need to be explored, the fact that most abusive relationships are two-way relationships. And abuse begets abuse. I mean, I hear this all the time. I literally heard it today. This idea of like, well, if you're abused, when you grow up and have kids, won't you treat your kids really well? Because you'll know how bad it is to be abused. No, when you grow up from being a child into an adult and you are abused, you learn from a young age that that's what's normal. That's how you learn to behave around other people.
Yeah, and so often I hear, and, you know, some people will argue with this, but so often I hear that's, oh, what you need to do is hit your kids. I was hit when I was a kid, you know, and I'm going to do the same thing. And it's like, okay, so I have a question for you. If that's what you do to your kids, do your kids ever get into fights? How often do they do that to their siblings? Mm-hmm. If it happens more than a couple times a month, I think you have a problem. But that's me.
I literally heard somebody say that today, too.
Okay.
About, oh, it's not abuse, I just need to hit my kids.
Yeah, no, it's common rhetoric, and it's really disturbing. But, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, people try to justify. They
do try to use comedy to talk about it in a more serious way. Because when you're talking about something serious, sometimes, comedy isn't necessarily belittling the situation. In a lot of cases, comedy is a good tool to really explore really dark, messed up things about us and about people we know. And it was really interesting to see the movie do that. It was also a really good period piece. The costumes were awesome. I mean, they did obviously look like her original costumes. You need a certain amount of skill to be a good costume maker and make something that looks like crap. It's definitely what they were doing. It looked homemade to a T. It was fantastic.
There's a phrase that I've heard called white trash beautiful, and that's...
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And when I had heard that Tanya was Tanya was on the list for a possible hair and makeup nomination, I was upset because, dude, The Shape of Water, come on. But I was like, Tanya, really? Come on. And then I watched the movie and I was like, oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and there was a lot of bruising and all that kind of stuff that looked really realistic as well.
It was great because you had the period makeup, you had the character makeup, and you had the gore makeup. Or not the gore makeup, but the injury makeup. And by character makeup, I mean they did a really good job of styling each person where, this is going to sound odd, but if you didn't have the actor underneath their face and their hair, you could still tell who was who. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Really good character-based makeup. I loved how ugly she looked. The scene right before she had the problem with her shoelace, and she had that really horrible dark lipstick, and she just looked like garbage. That was brilliant.
But in her eyes, she looked beautiful.
But it so perfectly walked that line where you could see it.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. And this was the biggest snub for cinematography this year.
Oh my god.
Because the cinematographer, okay, first of all, I think it's pretty obvious how a lot of the cinematography is really good. It does 180s, 360s. There's this great shot where the camera is on the floor and then goes all the way to a bird's eye view and it's following her eye line. It's a really beautiful shot. And the editing was really good to help allow you to see really long takes that, it wasn't trying to chop, so you couldn't actually see the cinematography. But the cinematographer is carrying a film camera, filming handheld, and skating with her. Because when I was watching the movie, I was like, clearly this is crane. This is a crane, obviously. I was like, because you probably can't get a dolly on the ice.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it didn't look like a dolly anyway, but I was like, duh, of course, it's a crane shot.
I could see somebody putting a track in and maybe using a telephoto lens to kind of create that illusion. Mm-hmm. But to actually be down there and do it is even more impressive. Also, I'm sure that equipment was incredibly expensive and
heavy.
Yeah.
It's dude, what does it take to get an Oscar nomination? Seriously.
Yeah, Neon's been killing it this year.
Neon's been killing it.
This is another Neon pick. I said that Ingrid Goes West was a fantastic film. That was Neon, and this is my other Neon pick.
You might also know one of their Neon shorts, Hi Stranger.
Yeah.
If you don't look it up, that's it.
Yeah, so I wasn't expecting to like this movie as much as I did. I was expecting to like the movie, but I legitimately love this movie. This is a 5-star movie for me.
So my number 10 is Loving Vincent. Does that need to be held off for a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. My number 9 was I, Tonya. My number 8 is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Does that need to wait? Okay.
Yeah.
My number 7 is a movie that was not talked about nearly enough this year, was not seen nearly enough this year, mostly because it wasn't played nearly enough this year, actually in the theaters for people to know that it was there and go see it. It's a movie with a very long title, Roman J. Israel Esquire. Written and directed by Dan Gilroy, one of my favorites. He was one of the co-writers for The Fall, which is incredible. His directorial debut was for a screenplay that he wrote called Nightcrawler. Yeah, that was the same guy. And it stars Denzel Washington, who is a good actor. He's never been one of those, oh, I gotta go see the Denzel Washington movie that's out right now, kind of. I was more, I gotta see the Dan Gilroy movie out. But Denzel Washington, I'm so glad that he got nominated because he earned it so hard in this movie.
Yeah, and I guarantee you so many people are going to see the nomination, just be like, oh, he got nominated because he was Denzel Washington.
No.
Not really for this role.
There's no part of Denzel Washington in that movie, and I say that with the utmost respect. He's not in the movie. It's just Roman is in the movie. You know, there are some times where the actor can really just blend into the character, and that's all that you see. It's just so fantastic. It's such a weird movie to pitch, though, because the movie is about this guy who's a lawyer. He's a criminal defense lawyer.
Yeah.
I think. And his business partner has died, and he's trying to figure out what he wants to do. Well, what he wants to do is he wants to do a lot of, like, civil rights activism. He really wants to pursue, like, legal cases about civil rights. But he is having a hard time fitting into those kinds of places, partly because of his age and his experience, and partly because they can't pay him. So where's he going to go? So he gets scooped up by this big firm that, you know, it's super corporate, and he doesn't fit in there either. And he's one of those people with, like, this really straight blade morality, and it's about his own internal struggle with his hypocrisy. It sounds really odd and potentially not very interesting, but it's got a very almost Martin McDonagh-esque, darkly funny sort of a sense of humor about it, where things are really messed up and really funny. The opening will probably sell you on whether or not you actually like the movie. It's a case of Roman J. Israel Esquire versus himself. And it's this case that he's writing up on a typewriter where he's trying to take himself to court, and it's really funny. But when you get to the point where you come back around to that scene and you know what he's talking about, it's really messed up and still really funny. And that was another one where the costuming was so smart, so character-driven. It's one of those movies, again, like I, Tonya, where there's so much artistry in making something look awful. It's really good because his outfits and his hair and makeup, and when he goes from, you know, sort of one wardrobe set to another, I'll put it that way, like, you can tell how much it really says about his character. I actually thought it was a period piece, which was the really brilliant thing. It was kind of like watching the first episode of This Is Us at the end, where it's like, oh, what? We don't know what time period it is, because you played it so well. There is a moment in the movie where you're like, wait, this isn't the 90s? What? This is now? What? Oh, it's so good. It's an odd movie to talk about since nobody's talking about it, but really, 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 really good stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely an honorable mention to me. This just speaks to this year. I mean, there were so many films that I saw, and I really had to choose my darlings. I really had to choose my 5-star, 4-star movies to be on my list. And this is definitely a 4-star movie for me.
Oh.
Didn't quite make a 5-star for me, but I really enjoyed this movie.
Okay, well, for me, it was a 5-star, but as I said before, my 2 through 10 is essentially just a 9-way tie. Like, I kind of have them ranked, but not really, because it's too good. But I highly recommend it, even if you're just kind of listening to me ramble about it and you're like, wait, what? What? Just watch it.
It's really
it's
tense.
Wildly entertaining, but it is tense. It says a lot about classism. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those movies that, like, after watching it, I was like, did this movie just fail at marketing? I mean, I get the title is a little full of itself, but, you know, the character.
So is the character, yeah.
It fits. So, yeah, it fits, but it's kind of a hard sell, you know, especially when you know nothing about it.
But if I kind of figure all you have to do is say from the creator of Nightcrawler, and you'll sell tickets. But nope.
Well, Nightcrawler is a very specific type of movie that appeals to a very specific type of audience. You know, yes, it was a more popular movie, but that gets more into the seedy underbelly, and that's kind of where Dan Gilroy likes to stay, which is interesting.
I will say, I think the really shitty little small circular fuzzy Sony headphones, that's one of my top props this year. That just said so much.
Yeah, well, it's funny because, like, you saw it and then you're like, oh, wait, he has an iPod?
Yeah.
Wait, is this, like, early 2000s?
With those headphones.
Yeah.
Just, what?
Yeah.
Well, because he's an audiophile, but those headphones sound like garbage. But exactly.
Yeah.
He's an audiophile with those kind of headphones.
It kind of reminded me of American Psycho. But, like, that would have made sense at that time.
Well, that would have made sense at that time, because at that time, that was more top-of-the-line equipment.
Yeah, and he hasn't moved on.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting, like, you know, I don't want to give too much away, but it is interesting, like, how later in the film, he does kind of update some of the stuff that he has, and then he starts to look a little bit more like Denzel Washington, but there's still that element of this character, and he never feels like Denzel Washington in this movie, which, you know, I know a lot of people are kind of tired of him, but, like, seriously, check out this movie. It's really good.
It also has, seriously, some of the best dialogue in any movie this year. There's a really awesome scene. I mean, there are many scenes that are similar to this, but my go-to scene is there's a scene where he's gonna give a lecture to a bunch of college kids. And he's sort of trying to be like how cool things were when he was in college. And there is sort of this dealing with the generational gap, but it's not in like a I'm trying to be cool dad kind of a silly thing. It's more of a like, wow, you are a relic. Right. You don't have a place in the world anymore. Because this part was in the trailer, so I don't think it's a spoiler. There's a couple of girls, they're leaning up against this this pillar, and Roman's like, hey, what's up with that? You know, the sisters are standing while the brothers are sitting, and the girls are like, wait, what the fuck are you talking about? We're adult, independent women. We can stand. Men don't have to make room for us. We're fine. And he's like, no, they need to be polite. There's a thing called manners, and it's really funny, but it's also really tragically sad. Just this, like, complete inability to connect.
Yeah.
So, Roman J.'s Real Esquire, absolutely fantastic film. My number 6, which I get a feeling we can't talk about yet either, and I'm a little embarrassed that this is not even in my top 5, but then my top 5 is Shape of Water.
And that's our 10 through 6. Stay tuned for our 5 through 1.
And honorable mentions.